Hello everyone, my name is Mesut Durukal. I'm a quality assurance engineer and I'm super happy to be a part of this amazing conference. As most of my colleagues, I'm doing mostly test automation in daily basis because nowadays we know that we are having some continuous deliveries instead of big or seasonal releases. And although we know that quality assurance is not only testing and testing is not only test automation, still test automation is a very important part of this whole DevOps cycle. And of course, in these terms, the reliability of the test automation and of course, the maintenance of test automation is very important. What I mean is, if our test cases are not reliable, if somehow we are not capable of catching the bugs on time, or on the other hand, if we are having some false failures, and if we are blocking the release cycles, then it means that we are not performing some efficient cycles and our tests are not reliable. So, in these terms, reliability is very important. And a little bit parallel to this topic, the maintenance and reusability of the test cases are very important. And in this talk, I will a little bit talk about the reusability, especially I will focus on how we can write reusable test cases and remove the duplication. So I will explain what I mean by reusability, or what is the importance of having duplication, or what are the some potential risks of having duplication in our test framework we will talk about. So this will be the brief agenda for this talk. We will start by these definitions and discussing the importance of these terms. And I will explain some implementation tips using Cypress. Cypress is one of the most commonly used JavaScript-based end-to-end test automation frameworks. But whatever you are using, which library or which framework you are integrating or leveraging into your test automation environment, you can still utilize these proposals because although the examples will be based or on top of on these framework Cypress solutions, those will be still some generic solutions or proposals and can be adapted into any test automation environment. And finally, I will have a quick demo. I will not have live coding in this session, but at least I want to have a few small executions to show how I can execute the same test scenario with different configurations. So let's get started. First of all, we have lots of different challenges in software test automation life cycle because the tests, the applications or the products that we are testing, the system under test is nowadays very comprehensive. It has lots of different integrations or interfaces. So we have to cover a very comprehensive scope in our testing activities. And of course, we are doing agile practices, which means we have to be open, very open for changes or update requests. And we have to cope with these kind of frequent updates whenever the behaviors or the expected results that we are checking are changed or updated. We have to update our test cases accordingly. Otherwise, we will be covering the wrong scope. So to be able to keep our test cases up to date, we have to continuously maintain. And of course, these all activities need a lot of effort because this continuous maintenance or even continuous updates of test cases is not easy. We have to always keep an eye on test results. And if we notice any failing test cases or flaky test case, we have to apply our fix and we have to update our test cases. So we have to be very quick. If there's an update, we have to quickly adapt to the new updated result or the behavior, and we have to keep our test cases up to date. And in the meantime, this is a preparation of the test case. So working in agile environments, we have to already start our test preparations in the meantime with the development activities. But in addition to that, even in terms of the test execution, execution duration is very important. Because if we are running our test cases in a very long time, maybe we will be blocking the releases. The features that are implemented will be waiting for the test results. And after a long time, if we still don't have the test results, then they will be blocked for some time. So we have to reduce our test execution durations as much as possible. And finally, of course, we have to reduce the flaky tests, which means we have to improve the reliability. What I mean by reliability, for example, if the feature is working as expected, but our test case is somehow failing, which means it is reporting a failure, it means it is not a real bug because normally the feature is working as expected. But our test case is for some reason failing. So it's a false alarm. But what is the result of this situation? It will cost some extra maintenance effort because we have to understand, we have to do the root cause analysis, and we have to understand if this is a real bug or a false alarm. So each time we have to go and investigate the execution details, and we have to figure out what was the root cause for the failure. And on the other hand, if there is an issue or a vulnerability or a weakness, whatever, in the feature that will go to production, and if our test case is not failing, which means it is not catching the issue, then it means we are missing the issue, and most probably we will release to production, and we will have the escaped bug because we will not be catching on time on the correct stage, but we will already have this on the later stages, maybe coming from the production environment reported by the customers. So it will be an escape bug, it will be a prestige issue for us. So both in these terms, the test reliability is very important. And there are lots of different test smells which may appear in test automation frameworks causing these test reliability issues. So we have to cope with this kind of test smells, and we have to reduce all the potential root causes for these reliability issues. But if we have some duplication, which means some code is duplicated in lots of different instances, then it is even more difficult. Because whenever we figure out that there's a issue that we have to fix in our test automation framework, and this code is duplicated in lots of different classes, what we have to do is we have to fix all the classes separately. But if we have only one point of implementation, and this implemented method or class or whatever it is called from lots of different instances or test spec files, in that case, we can fix only that single point of implementation, and all the usages would be already reflected after our fix. So this is the way of removing duplication, and it will already ease the our fixes or our maintenance activities. So duplication and removing duplication and improving the reusability is very important. So I will share one example from our real life. In my recent project, I'm working for a job seekers company, which means in our company we are producing some products and releasing to our customers or the end users, and they are helping the job seekers. So if some people are searching for some jobs in some destinations or locations, they are just passing some keywords or job titles or descriptions, and they can perform a query, job query, and they can find lots of different job descriptions and then apply to any of them. But the important point in this project is there are lots of different web applications. But why do we have lots of different web applications serving to the same purpose? Because they're operating in different countries, and some of them are serving to different majors, like some of them are only concentrated on the nurse jobs, for example. It is called simply nurses site, or some sites are serving or concentrated mostly for the teachers, engineers. So we can design it some web applications for different majors, or even for different types of jobs. For example, in some sites we mostly have some permanent type jobs, or in some others it is mostly part-time jobs, mostly used by the students. So in short, we have different websites. In each of them, you can use the same scenario. You can perform the same scenario. You can basically navigate to the website and perform your query by passing some keywords and the location in which you want to do your search. So in this way, what I can do is I do not have to implement separate test cases, but I can implement only a single test case, and I can somehow execute this test case on these different applications by passing some different configurations. And not only the application itself, but also I can change the browser on which the test is running. And of course, we have some different stages in our development cycles. For example, we first deploy to the development environment. And then if there is no major issues, then we deploy to the QA stage. And then eventually, if there is no critical issues or bugs, then we deploy to production. So in each of them, after the deployment or the release, first of all, we have to verify the functionality in this stage, in first in dev environment, and then QA, and finally in the production environment. So the URLs under test is different for each this stage. So what I should do is I should generate my URL dynamically, and in this way I can still execute the same test case in different stages. For example, if I select the dev environment, it will go to the relevant UI and navigate to the relevant pages and check or perform the test scenario. Or otherwise, if I select the other stages, the test case is executed on the relevant stage with the relevant application. And finally, I can execute this test case on either desktop version or the mobile version, because sometimes we have some native apps, but sometimes we have only the mobile version of the web application. They just simply open a browser in their mobile devices, and the end users performing their searches in their mobile devices rather than using the PC in desktop mode. So this is also important. So and some of them are using different browsers. So maybe I have to cover the executions on desktop on some browsers and on mobile versions as well on maybe some different browsers. So this is the problem and the solution that we have to remove the duplication and improve the reusability by passing different configurations. And let me share you how we can do that. Let me share you some implementation tips, and I will finally show you how we can execute with passing different configurations. This is a very simple sample test case, which can be executed on lots of different configurations. This is only two lines, except the logging steps. The first is just navigating to the relevant website and finding an element, which is the text input on which the users are passing their queries. And then after passing the query, the expected result is seeing some auto completion options, just as using any search engine that we are using nowadays. Just after we start typing, we see some already auto completion options, right? So this is just a similar behavior that we want to see in our products. So after start typing, we want to see the auto completion options. So the second line after passing the option is the passing the query is just to assert the auto completion options. This is eventually what we will see in our test code. So the important things to implement this test code in a reusable way is, first of all, we have to utilize the configuration. So in lots of E2E test automation frameworks, there's a configuration file in which we can set lots of different environmental parameters. For example, even the screenshots or the videos that will be captured in the failing test scenarios, or maybe some other folders in which we will manage our files, spec files, or other supportive files, or even the fixture files we can manage, and even custom variables which are called environmental variables we can keep in our configuration file. So this is the very first thing that we can utilize in our frameworks. And if we introduce some custom variables, we can read from the config file and we can adapt to our implementation. So after reading those custom variables, we can dynamically generate the URLs or the variables, and then we can use according to the custom parameters passed by the users just before the execution. And then, of course, a second tip to use in our test implementations is the hooks, which means the duplicated code which is running before or after each test case or test suite. So if we have some repeated steps, like if we are doing the login operation before each test case, first of all, we have to go to the our base URL, and then we have to pass our credentials. That is the login step, and then continue with our test steps. If this is the case, we don't have to implement the login steps in each of test case. But what we can do is we can implement some hooks before, which is running before each suite, or before each, which is running before each test case, and then we can continue our test steps. And these can be defined globally, which means again we don't have to write this in these hooks in each test specs, but we can globally define them. And even if we write only the test steps inside the spec files, these hooks are called before the executions. And of course, having some helper classes is a very important part, because if we have some repeated steps, of course, we can extract them into some separate classes or methods, and then we can call them from our spec files. In this way, whenever we have to update them or apply a fix, then we can only fix the relevant class or the method. We don't have to update all the spec files separately, or we don't have to fix them, each of them, and we won't have to increase our maintenance effort. And of course, when talking about UI automation, the page interactions is very important. First of all, we have to navigate to the pages and we have to interact with the pages. So as human beings, what we are doing is, first of all, we locate the element. For example, if there's a button on the page, first of all, we find manually or by our eyes, we find where the button is, and then we click. Or if there are any text fields or there are any other input fields, then we have to locate them, and we have to do our interactions like passing the keys, or there may be some other operations that we can do. So for letting machines know what we want to do, of course, they cannot locate the elements as we do. So we have to let them know which elements we want to interact. So the way to do that is defining the locators or the selectors. So in Cypress, of course, we can use lots of different ways to do that. But the very basic way to do that is just passing the tag name, like either it's a input or a button or a form, and then continue with some other attributes like the class name or some additional attributes. So one tip in implementing the locators is we can merge all the locators in a class. In the traditional implementation way, we know that page object model is a very commonly used method. So for Cypress or the other modern test automation frameworks, page object is not the recommended way, but at least if we collect all the locators into a one class file, it will be very easy to manage, because whenever we need to update some of them, we can just go to the relevant locators file and we can update the locator. And the second tip is sometimes dealing with difficult or not manageable locators will cause some trouble. So what we can do is we can introduce some unique IDs. For example, the ID itself is something that we can use. But even if the ID is not there, we can use some other unique IDs like data test ID. And if in this way, even if the page layout is updated by the developers, the locators will not be broken, because the unique ID will still remain same, and we will still reduce the maintenance effort that we have to do. And in the last part, I will show a quick execution of test cases. So let me show, first of all, before starting the execution, let me introduce how the test case will look like. It is just navigating to a web page and then passing a query and then clicking the search button. So this is the very starting point of implementation. We can just visit the web page and we can find the element by passing the locator and then doing our interaction. And even at this point, we already can realize that there are some things that we can improve. For example, the locator is already duplicated even inside the spec file. So even we have only once happening in the spec file, the same locator can be used in other spec files. But even in this file, inside the spec file, the same locator is duplicated and used 2 times. So what we can do is we can introduce these locators and we can assign them to some variables and we can manage in some separate files. Let me show you how we can do that. We can introduce the locator as the keyword field variable here. And of course, we can introduce a second variable for the main page that we are navigating. And in this way, it will be, of course, removing the duplication for locators. But to make the main page configurable, what we can do is we can generate our URL to navigate in a dynamic way by reading the configuration passed by the users. And after that, it will depend on which application we want to test and we are passing to execution, and it will navigate to the relevant site. And one last thing we can use is the test configs. Rather, in addition to the global config, we can introduce some configs to the test case itself. And in this way, we can either skip or have some specific action items depending on the test case itself. For example, this is a very example test config that I'm passing. I'm introducing to the test IDs and priority level of the test case and the applicable application for this test case. So this way I can use lots of different configuration for the test case itself, not the global config, but customized config in the test levels. So, one more thing we can do is the mobile testing, and we have to pass some maybe custom headers if our test case or the product that we are testing is not responsive. Or otherwise, we can just set the viewport, which means the window size, and it will be already testing the mobile version. And again, we can select this from the test config. I will show you in a minute. And this is just to customize our headers. If it is not responsive, and if we have to add a custom header, which is the user agent, to our request, then we can capture by intercept methods, and we can customize our headers and doing the mobile version. And we can loop in our mobile and desktop versions. So I'll quickly switch to my IDE and very quickly execute one test case and show you how I can execute on different websites. So this is the test case that I was sharing to you. So first of all, I'm finding the locator here, and then I'm just typing something. It's not relevant. It's not important what I'm passing. So just start typing something, and then immediately I should see some auto completion options. So let me execute this. For example, I will use the open mode in Cypress to see the runner itself, and I will select the test case that I want to use. So I can already select the browsers, and I want to go with Chrome this time. And when I select Chrome, I can see the runner operating in Chrome, and I will select the autocomplete test here. So let me quickly start again. Autocomplete test is here. Somehow Chrome is stuck, I guess. So let me select another one, like Electron. All right. When I see when I select the auto complete test, now I can see that it is running in mobile and it is going to the Charisma website. So it just start typing something, and I already see in the drop-down menu there are some auto-completion options. So I can see that there it already found 10 different options, and my expectation is at least it should be more than 0. So let me execute the very same test case without changing anything in the code by just passing the configuration. So let me close this. And this time I'm changing my configuration by passing the execution platform as desktop, not mobile. And let me change the application as well. My application was Charisma, and this time I will start with Vercopolis, which is another website that we are developing in our project. And again, I'm using Electron. And when I select the same test case, this time, I see that it is going to Workopolis, not Charisma anymore as the previous execution. And this time, I see that it is running in the desktop mode, not in a mobile mode anymore. And again, it found 10 different options for the auto completion suggestions, and this was already the expected behavior. Since actual behavior met with the expected behavior, the test passed. So I will stop my execution here and switch back to my slide. And this was just the last demonstration that I wanted to share. And just as a final wrap up, reusability of test cases is very important in our test automation activities, because otherwise we will have some duplication and it will cause some extra maintenance efforts, and it will block us to fasten our deployments. But on the contrary, it will slow down the deliveries and the efficiency. Thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, I will be more than happy to answer. Just feel free to connect to me over any communication channels I shared on this slide.